They mocked the obese noblewoman's banquet, but when she served it, the rancher wept. The sun dipped low over Dustwood Creek as Lady Beatrice Hawthorne stood at the edge of the town square, clutching a stack of ivory-coloured envelopes. Her satin gown, elegant yet modestly cut to conceal the generous curves of her frame, rustled in the late afternoon breeze. Each envelope bore her family's crest in gilded ink, and inside, an invitation to the grand banquet she would host that very evening at Elm Creek Manor. Ha! Jasper Pruitt, the local blacksmith's apprentice, snorted as he eyed her from where he leaned against the hitching post. "What's this? A feast for ants, or is she simply feeding the flies?" A chorus of jeers rose from the gathered townsfolk. The saloon girls, the ranch hand leaning on his lasso, the ferryman unloading barrels at the dock. Even Sheriff Cole, the very rancher who would later weep, allowed a mocking smile to slip onto his weathered face. Lady Beatrice's heart fluttered, but she squared her shoulders and raised her chin. "Good people of Dustwood," she called, her voice clear and unwavering, "you are cordially invited to share a meal of simple fare and heartfelt hospitality. I would be honored by your presence." Laughter and murmurs raced through the crowd. Some whispered that her invitations were as empty as her promises. Others speculated that the manor's kitchens must be haunted. No mortal cook could craft a meal worthy of her title. Wyatt Cole folded his arms across his broad chest and stepped forward. His boots scuffed the dusty ground as he spat a slender arc of tobacco juice. "I reckon there's more spectacle in her shape than substance in her soup," he muttered to Deputy Collings, who nodded and chuckled. Lady Beatrice met Wyatt's gaze. There was something in his stern blue eyes, a flicker of pain perhaps, that seemed to appeal to her better nature. She offered him an envelope anyway, her slender fingers brushing his calloused ones. He snatched it roughly and tore it open, his expression unreadable. As the sun slipped below the horizon, lanterns flickered to life around the square. Torches were lit, and the long tables at Elm Creek Manor gleamed with polished oak. Soon, the townsfolk would gather at the doors, some out of curiosity, most out of mockery, unaware that the true banquet would not be defined by the food upon their plates, but by the grace with which it was offered. Wyatt Cole rode slowly back to his homestead after the sun slipped beneath the western range. His mount's hooves kicked up soft clouds of dust, mirroring the unrest stirring within him. The invitation, now crumpled in his coat pocket, felt heavier than any sack of grain he had ever hauled. He dismounted at the weathered fence surrounding his small ranch and paused to recall the last time he had attended any gathering. It was before Mary's passing, before the drought claimed half his herd. Back then, laughter had been easy and smiles genuine. Now the world seemed tilted against him, and every kindness tasted of salt and regret. Leaning on his saddle, Wyatt closed his eyes and imagined the tables at Elm Creek Manor, draped in white linen and laden with dishes he had never dared to try. His mouth watered at the thought of fresh cornbread with melting butter, and yet his pride fought every tender impulse. "Why even go?" he muttered. "They'll only jeer and squint at my scars." Scars, both visible and hidden, marked every inch of his being. The town knew some. The jagged line across his cheek from a bar brawl, the limp he carried after a runaway wagon crushed his ankle. But they did not know the scars that opened and closed in his chest when grief struck hardest. Night settled in as he unlocked his cabin door. Inside, the fireplace crackled, warming the room with golden light. He stripped off his coat and sat at the rough-hewn table, tracing the grain in the wood. The invitation lay atop a pile of unpaid bills. He picked it up, smoothing its edges. "I reckon she means well," he admitted aloud, "but I've no taste for charity." He shoved the papers aside and stared into the dancing flames. The warmth reminded him of Mary's hearth, of her soft humming as she kneaded dough and sang old lullabies. A cough at the door made Wyatt start. Deputy Collings stood on the threshold, hat in hand, hesitating. "Sheriff said to remind you, sir, the banquet starts in an hour," Collings said quietly. "He thinks you ought to go." Wyatt's jaw tightened. "Collings, you know I don't do well with company." Collings nodded, eyes sympathetic. "All the more reason, sir. Sometimes a man needs to remember what it's like to sit among folks who don't expect him to be anything but himself." Wyatt studied the deputy's earnest face. In that moment, the crumpled invitation in his coat felt less like an insult and more like a lifeline. He rose and shrugged on his coat, then let Collings close the door behind him. Mounting his horse, Wyatt set his jaw. "All right," he murmured, "let's see what that noblewoman has planned." As he spurred his horse toward Elm Creek, his heart pounded with uneasy anticipation. Doubt still gnawed at him, but somewhere beneath the calls of coyote and whispering wind, a spark of hope flickered. In the fading light of late afternoon, Lady Beatrice Hawthorne stood in Elm Creek Manor's grand kitchen, its hearth roaring with welcoming flames. The air was thick with the scent of sizzling bacon and sweet molasses. Her silk skirts were covered by a sturdy linen apron, embroidered with her grandmother's initials, M.H., a reminder of the lineage of women who had nourished body and soul within these walls. She closed her eyes and murmured a silent prayer of gratitude before dipping her hand into a wooden bowl of dough. Her fingers worked the soft, yielding mass with practiced ease, kneading in the warmth of memories. Flour dusted the tabletop like fresh snow, and when she lifted her gaze, she saw rolling pins, copper pots, and bowls of fragrant herbs lined up like devoted servants. First came the cornbread, golden kernels ground into meal, mixed with buttermilk and a whisper of honey. She shaped the loaves with care, remembering how her grandmother would chant an old blessing over each one. Next, the slow-cooked ribs, marinated overnight in a secret blend of spices, smoky paprika, wild sage, and a hint of cinnamon. As the meat sizzled, she basted it with drippings infused with brown sugar and molasses, coaxing a caramelized glaze that promised both comfort and surprise. On the far stove, she stirred the final element. A sauce of roasted tomatoes, sweet onions, and minced garlic simmered until it formed a velvety red tide. Into it, she folded fresh basil from the manor's herb garden. The sauce's aroma curled under the rafters, as if seeking approval from the old oaken beams. A soft knock sounded at the back door. Beatrice set aside her spoon and wiped her hands on her apron. It was Mrs. Delaney, the elderly housekeeper, carrying baskets of garden vegetables and fresh eggs. "Everything's ready, milady," Mrs. Delaney whispered, bowing slightly. "Thank you, Delaney," Beatrice replied, smiling. "Please fetch the trays and help me arrange the platters. Tonight we serve more than food." Together they loaded heavy silver dishes with symmetrical rows of cornbread, racks of ribs, and bowls of steaming sauce. Beatrice arranged each plate as though presenting a gift, slices fanned like petals, garnishes of parsley, adding a verdant promise. She paused before one platter, closed her eyes, and pressed her palm against the cool silver. In that moment, she felt the weight of expectation and hope compressed as tightly as the dough beneath her fingers. As lantern light blossomed in the kitchen windows, the final preparations were complete. Beatrice lifted the lid of a gleaming tureen, and the steam rose in soft plumes. With a deep breath, she squared her shoulders and reminded herself, tonight's banquet would not only feed hungry mouths, but also heal wounded hearts. Wyatt Cole swapped his saddle for solid oak as he approached the gates of Elm Creek Manor. Lanterns hung from iron hooks, casting dancing pools of light across the gravel path. Rows of tables draped in pristine white linens formed a corridor leading to the grand entrance, while the soft clink of silverware and murmured conversations drifted on the cool night air. He paused at the threshold, taking in Lady Beatrice Hawthorne descending the marble steps, flanked by two formally dressed attendants. Her deep, emerald velvet gown caught the lantern light, but it was the serene confidence in her grey eyes that held his gaze. All around him, townsfolk approached hesitantly, some with skeptical frowns, others exchanging curious glances. "Sheriff Cole!" called Mrs. Delaney from the head table, motioning to a seat of honor beside Lady Beatrice. "We've saved you the best spot." Wyatt walked between the tables, feeling the hush that fell as he passed. The aroma of warm cornbread, caramelized ribs, and that rich, spicy sauce curled around him like a welcome. Settling into his chair, he removed his hat and watched as Lady Beatrice placed a generous helping of ribs and a thick slice of bread on his plate. Her fingertips brushed his arm in a gentle, reassuring gesture that took him by surprise. The crackle of the great fireplace echoed through the hall as guests leaned forward. Some whispered, "She's outdone herself," while others murmured, "Who knew simple fare could look so inviting?" Wyatt lifted his knife, eyeing the bread first. He broke off a piece and brought it to his lips, bracing himself. The moment he tasted the buttery crumb, his hardened heart softened. A warmth spread through him reminiscent of childhood kitchens and laughter long silenced by grief. Silence enveloped the central table. Every eye turned to Wyatt Cole, the man known for stoicism and solitude. He chewed slowly, savoring each note of honeyed sweetness and smoky spice. Lady Beatrice returned to his side. Wyatt set down his knife, his hands trembling only slightly, and looked up at her. "I've never tasted anything so genuine," he said, voice thick with emotion. A wave of approval rippled through the guests. What began as mockery had transformed into reverence. Under the soft glow of lanterns, the true banquet unfolded, not just of flavors, but of compassion and shared humanity. The torchlight danced across the long gallery as Lady Beatrice drifted from guest to guest, her smile warm and genuine, despite the earlier mockery. Wyatt Cole sat at the head table, his plate set before him like a small treasure trove. A thick rib, still glistening with caramelized glaze, a generous wedge of cornbread, and at the center, a porcelain bowl of the vibrant red sauce, flecked with basil and onions. The hush that had fallen over the guests now felt sacred, as if they all awaited a miracle. Wyatt picked up a rib, its meat yielding beneath his touch. He paused for a heartbeat, an unspoken moment of reluctance, before raising it to his lips. The crack of the bone echoed through the hall, a solitary note breaking the tension. As he bit into the meat, the sweet, spicy flavor unfolded like a ribbon of warmth. Each chew unlocked memories, a mother's gentle humming as she basted Sunday roasts, laughter bustling around a crowded family table, the comfort of belonging he had thought lost forever. He closed his eyes, the flavors enveloping him, and the unwavering gaze of Lady Beatrice met his. Soft gasps and murmurs rippled through the hall. Jasper Pruitt, the blacksmith's apprentice who had jeered at Beatrice's invitations, straightened in his seat and leaned forward, his spoon suspended in mid-air. Even the stoic Deputy Collings, standing guard at the door, had his jaw slightly slack, as though tasting that first bite vicariously through Wyatt. Wyatt set the rib down and reached for the cornbread. He tore off a cube and dipped it into the sauce, swirling until the bread soaked up every drop. The contrast of tender crumb and piquant sauce was a revelation. He swallowed, then placed the bread gently back on the plate, his fork hovering as if uncertain what to do next. Lady Beatrice approached again, carrying a small dish of her grandmother's honey butter, a pale golden swirl of richness. With careful hands, she drizzled a ribbon of honey over the cornbread, and Wyatt felt a tremor of gratitude so profound it threatened to spill from his eyes. He cleared his throat, voice low but steady. "This is more than food. It's kindness in every bite." A hush deepened, broken only by the crackle of the fireplace. The guests exchanged stunned looks, as if waking from a collective dream. Jasper Pruitt stood and raised his glass. "To Lady Beatrice," he declared, voice cracking with sincerity, "for teaching us that even simple fare can feed the soul." Glasses were lifted in a ripple of approval. Wyatt felt the weight of centuries of prejudice dissolve in the warmth of that moment, replaced by a fellowship born of shared humanity. Around the hall, plates were refilled and conversations sparked, not of mockery, but of newfound respect. Lady Beatrice's eyes shone. She stepped beside Wyatt, and together they surveyed the transformed gathering. What had begun as a banquet of scorn had become a feast of hope. As the evening deepened, lanterns burned lower, casting a golden, intimate glow across the banquet hall. The air was thick with the mingled scents of spices and wood smoke, but even richer was the sense of wonder now settling over the gathering. Plates were emptied and quickly refilled. Laughter began to bloom at the edges of the room, tentative but sincere. But in the center, at the head table, a remarkable hush had settled. Wyatt Cole, once so quick to judge, now sat quietly, the echoes of old grief stirring within him. He found himself staring at Lady Beatrice, watching the way she listened to every guest, how her eyes lingered on the children and the weary, how her smile seemed to ease even the hardest faces. No one noticed at first how the room had grown silent. One by one, conversations faded as people witnessed the sincerity in Wyatt's gaze and the soft gratitude in Beatrice's every gesture. Even Jasper Pruitt, who had always filled silences with brash jokes, simply chewed his food thoughtfully, lost in the flavors and the changing mood. Wyatt's mind wandered to his own kitchen, the quiet after Mary's passing, and the cold comfort of meals eaten in solitude. He remembered the sharp pang of being judged by others, of carrying wounds no one could see. But tonight, those wounds felt lighter. The food was more than sustenance. It was a bridge back to the person he once was, to memories of love and home. A soft voice broke the stillness. It was Mrs. Delaney, standing with her hands folded, tears shining in her eyes. "I never thought I'd taste food that could bring back my childhood," she whispered. Around her, several others nodded, and someone choked out a laugh, a genuine, grateful sound. Wyatt looked up at Lady Beatrice. For a moment he struggled to find the words. The room waited, breathless. He cleared his throat, and in that brief pause, his emotions threatened to overcome him. "I think," he began, "that sometimes a meal can say what words never could. Thank you, Lady Beatrice, for giving us more than we deserved, and more than we ever expected." Applause broke out, hesitant at first, but growing stronger, echoing beneath the high beams. Lady Beatrice's eyes glistened, and she pressed her hand to her heart. From that moment on, the meal was transformed into something sacred. Neighbors who had not spoken in years leaned in to share stories. Strangers laughed together, and the boundary between guest and host faded away. Outside, the night wind rattled the windows, but inside all was warmth and belonging, and at the heart of it the woman who had been mocked for her size and title stood taller than ever before, surrounded by the respect and affection she had so quietly earned. The banquet's warmth lingered long after the last rib bone was picked clean, but a quiet anticipation hung in the air, as if everyone sensed that something was about to change. The flicker of candlelight danced in the eyes of the guests, reflecting not only the glow of the feast, but a new sense of humility. For the first time in years, Elm Creek Manor brimmed with a spirit that transcended food and custom. Wyatt Cole remained at the head table, his hands resting atop his empty plate. He stared into the flickering flame of the nearest lantern, and his breathing grew unsteady. Memories, long buried under layers of dust and pride, welled up. He saw Mary's face in the lamplight, the smile she gave him across their own kitchen table, the way she pressed her hand over his when grief was too much to bear. He felt, keenly, the ache of what had been lost. Across the table, Lady Beatrice moved quietly among the guests, gathering empty dishes and exchanging soft words. Each person she touched seemed changed by her kindness. When she drew near Wyatt, she paused, sensing his struggle. For a moment, they stood in silence, the murmurs of the hall fading into the background. Wyatt tried to speak, but his voice failed. He reached for his glass, but his hand shook, and a single tear fell onto the worn wood of the table. Embarrassed, he bowed his head, but Lady Beatrice said nothing. Instead, She rested a gentle hand on his shoulder, firm and reassuring. The gesture, so simple and so freely given, broke through every defense Wyatt had built around his heart. Without warning, emotion overtook him. He wept, not the quiet, controlled tears of a man trying to hide, but a deep, shuddering release. The room fell utterly silent as heads turned toward him. It was not mockery or pity in their eyes, but recognition, a shared understanding of what it means to carry burdens alone and to finally lay them down. For a long moment, no one moved. Lady Beatrice knelt beside him, her presence steady and patient, not uttering a word, as Wyatt's grief poured out. The silence became a blanket around them both, warm and unjudging. At last, Wyatt found his voice. Through tears, he managed, "Thank you. I didn't know. I could still feel this way. I thought I'd lost it all." Lady Beatrice squeezed his shoulder. "You haven't lost anything that cannot be found again, Mr. Cole. Not as long as there is kindness in this world." The sincerity in her words echoed through the hall, stirring others who carried silent wounds. In that moment, the true purpose of the banquet became clear. It was never about the food alone, but about restoring faith in each other and in the simple power of compassion. As Wyatt wiped his tears, the crowd looked to Lady Beatrice anew, seeing her not as the subject of ridicule, but as the healer she was. The rancher's weeping became a benediction, sanctifying the night and binding the community in a bond of hope. Long after midnight, when the last echoes of laughter had faded, the guests lingered, reluctant to leave the newfound warmth of Elm Creek Manor. Wyatt Cole remained seated, his tears spent, but the raw honesty of his display lingered in the minds of all who had witnessed it. The walls of pride that had divided the townsfolk, walls built on old wounds, whispered judgments, and silent loneliness, had been broken, if only for one remarkable night. Lady Beatrice moved gracefully among her guests, her presence calm and radiant. She offered gentle words, sometimes just a reassuring hand on a shoulder. Her own heart was pounding with emotion. She had never dreamed that a simple meal could transform not just one man, but an entire community. But she also knew that for true healing to take root, there had to be words spoken aloud, truths acknowledged, and bridges built. As the hour grew late, Wyatt rose slowly from his seat, the hush in the room drawing every eye to him. For a moment, he simply stood, his hat in his hands, gathering his courage. Then, in a voice roughened by tears but clear as a bell, he addressed the room. "I owe you all an apology," Wyatt began, his gaze sweeping the tables. "I spent too long believing I was alone in my suffering, and in that loneliness I let bitterness grow. I mocked kindness and mistrusted what I didn't understand. Tonight, Lady Beatrice reminded all of us, that it takes far more courage to open your heart than to close it." He paused, turning to face Lady Beatrice. "I was wrong to doubt you, ma'am. I was wrong to join in the laughter. You have more strength and generosity than I ever gave you credit for. I'm sorry, not just to you, but to everyone here for not being the neighbor I should have been." A deep silence followed his words, heavier and more meaningful than any applause. Jasper Pruitt, who had started the night full of mockery, now stared at his empty glass, cheeks flushed with shame. Even Mrs. Delaney dabbed her eyes with her apron. Lady Beatrice stepped forward, meeting Wyatt's gaze with unwavering gentleness. "Forgiveness is a gift easily given, Mr. Cole, when the heart is sincere. We have all fallen short of kindness at times, but tonight you showed us that honesty and humility can build something stronger than pride." One by one the townsfolk stood, some with shaky legs, others with arms around loved ones. Several voiced their own regrets for past cruelties. The moment became a gentle reckoning, a washing away of old stains. In that shared vulnerability, a sense of renewal swept through the hall. Wyatt, still holding his hat, turned back to Lady Beatrice. "Would you join me at the table, ma'am? I think it's high time we shared a meal as equals." She smiled, tears shimmering in her eyes, and took his arm. As they sat together, the remaining guests crowded in, eager to offer their own thanks and apologies. The long tables, once marked by division, now brimmed with unity. For the first time in memory, Elm Creek Manor became what Lady Beatrice had always dreamed, a place of welcome for every soul, no matter how heavy their burdens or how deep their regrets. Outside, the first hints of dawn crept over the prairie, promising a day unlike any the town had seen before. Morning dawned gently over Elm Creek, casting a golden veil over the manor and the sleepy town beyond. Inside the great hall, guests had drifted into slumber beside the dying embers of the hearth, or gathered in small clusters, talking in hushed, hopeful tones. Lady Beatrice, exhausted but radiant, stood at the window and watched as sunlight swept across the fields, painting the world anew. The events of the night lingered, their significance impossible to ignore. People who had long been strangers or rivals found themselves sitting side by side, exchanging stories over remnants of cornbread and sauce. The blacksmith, Jasper Pruitt, who had once mocked Beatrice most cruelly, brought a basket of fresh horseshoes and set it by the manor door as a peace offering. Even the widow baker, famed for her sharp tongue, arrived that morning with a dozen eggs and a smile that softened the lines of age on her face. Wyatt Cole had not slept. He wandered the manor's gardens as dawn broke, turning over the memories of the night. Something inside him had shifted. A stone had rolled away from the door of his heart. He found Lady Beatrice tending a bed of morning glories, her hands dirty with earth and her hair falling in gentle waves. For a moment he simply watched her, awed by the quiet strength she radiated. He approached, hesitant. "Ma'am," he began, "I'd be honored to help repair the barn." "It's the least I can do after all you've done for us." Beatrice glanced up, a smile breaking across her tired face. "Thank you, Mr. Cole. There's much to be done, and I could use a friend more than a laborer." Wyatt blushed, scratching the back of his neck. "I think I could use a friend, too." Throughout that day, the townsfolk returned, one by one, each bringing a gift or an offer of help. Some fixed the broken fence along the southern field, others painted the porch or stacked firewood for the coming winter. Children played tag beneath the oaks, their laughter echoing across the grass. The manor, which had felt so cold and imposing for so long, was now alive with joy and purpose. At midday, the Reverend Parker arrived in his Sunday best, Bible tucked under one arm. He gathered everyone on the front steps and spoke words of blessing about humility, forgiveness, and the power of a shared table. He led a prayer, not for abundance or riches, but for community and gratitude. Lady Beatrice, moved to tears, realized that her years of loneliness and ridicule had been replaced by a bounty far greater than any noble title: true belonging. In the eyes of her neighbors, she saw not pity or scorn, but respect, and a kind of love that was new and healing. By sunset, Elm Creek Manor was transformed. The tables remained set in the yard, adorned with wildflowers and scraps of ribbon. As the sky blushed pink and gold, Lady Beatrice and Wyatt sat side by side, watching their friends and neighbors come and go. Words were unnecessary. In the peaceful silence, they shared something deeper than gratitude, a hope for the days ahead, and a quiet certainty that neither would ever face them alone again. The weeks after the banquet at Elm Creek Manor brought Dustwood into an era of quiet transformation. Each day, signs of the old world, cold stares, whispered gossip, unspoken rivalries, were replaced by new gestures of kindness. Lady Beatrice, once a figure of derision, now found herself at the heart of every gathering, her laughter ringing across the market square, her advice sought on matters from baking to planting to patching broken hearts. Wyatt Cole was often by her side. He'd come to rely on their morning routines, the gentle teasing over coffee on the porch, the way their hands brushed while they worked, side by side. Sometimes they walked together before dawn, watching the mist roll across the fields. Those walks were quiet, but never awkward, full of shared understanding and the unspoken bond that had grown between them. Preparations for the second banquet began with a spirit Dustwood had never known. Neighbors arrived days in advance, some just to offer a hand, others to bask in the feeling of being part of something good. Mrs. Delaney organized a pie-making brigade in the kitchen, orchestrating laughter and friendly competition. Jasper Pruitt brought his fiddle and played music as children swept the yard, the melody weaving through the halls and spilling into the street. On the morning of the banquet, Beatrice rose before the sun, the manor already alive with clatter and song. She took a moment to herself in the old parlor, looking at portraits of her ancestors, solemn faces in gilded frames, women and men who'd built the manor, each carrying burdens and dreams of their own. She smiled softly, feeling them with her, blessing this new chapter. Outside, Wyatt and a small team finished stringing lanterns in the sycamore trees, the glass globes catching the early light. The smell of bread baking mixed with the crisp air. He stopped a moment and watched Beatrice through the window, feeling gratitude for second chances, a sentiment he'd never thought would return. By midday, the manor was alive with movement. People arrived in a steady stream, baskets piled high with apples, jars of preserves, roasted chickens, and even a pot of blackberry wine from Widow Baker. Children darted around, tying scraps of ribbon and wildflowers along the fence posts. The Reverend Parker said a blessing as the guests found their seats, the long tables winding across the yard like rivers of linen and laughter. When every plate was full and every hand held in expectation, Lady Beatrice stood to speak. Her voice, strong and clear, rose above the chatter. "I once believed this house would always feel empty," she confessed. "But you have all filled it with your kindness, your forgiveness, and your hope. May we never again let fear or pride keep us apart." Wyatt squeezed her hand, his heart pounding with pride and affection. He stood beside her, adding, "And may we never forget the lesson we learned here, that a feast shared is more than food. It's the healing of wounds and the weaving of new families." The guests erupted in cheers and applause, some wiping tears from their eyes. As the sun dipped low, music began. Jasper's fiddle, joined by others with guitars and harmonicas. Neighbors who had long been strangers rose to dance, sharing stories and jokes, celebrating not just the food, but the life they were now building together. At the end of the evening, as lanterns cast soft halos through the night, Wyatt took Beatrice's hand and led her to the center of the lawn. The townsfolk formed a circle, clapping in rhythm as Wyatt bowed and spun her laughter bright as starlight. In that joyful whirl, the pain of old ridicule vanished, replaced by the unshakable truth that she was loved, exactly as she was. The dance slowed and the guests gathered for a final toast. Wyatt lifted his glass high. "To Lady Beatrice, who reminded us that the greatest banquet is not what we eat, but what we give. May our tables always be open and our hearts forever changed." The toast was echoed by all, voices ringing out under the velvet sky. As the last light faded and the stars awakened, Beatrice looked around at the faces shining with hope and knew, without doubt or hesitation, that she was finally, truly home. Inside the manor, as she extinguished the last candle, Beatrice whispered a prayer of thanks. The echo of the banquet lingered in every room, a promise that even in the harshest places, kindness could take root and grow into something miraculous. And so, Elm Creek Manor stood, not just as a house on the prairie, but as a beacon of what a single heart, brave enough to forgive and to hope, could inspire in an entire town. Before you go, take a moment to reflect. Have you ever witnessed kindness transform a heart, or a simple gesture bring a community together? If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know how compassion has touched your own life. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more tales that remind us all, even the smallest acts of goodness can change the world.